Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Today, I'm going to talk about the classic science fiction film from 1956, Forbidden Planet, which was put out by MGM. It was directed by Fred Wilcox, and it starred Leslie Nielsen, Walter Pidgeon, and Anne Francis. This was a fairly big budget science fiction film for its time. It has been very influential through the decades, and I'll talk more about that. But for the 50s, for a Hollywood movie, this was very sophisticated for science fiction. It also featured, as you can see right there, Robbie the Robot, who became an iconic character throughout science fiction history and was one of the first non-human characters to become famous. Robbie the Robot would appear in several TV shows, make appearances in later movies. Later, there would even be another movie with featuring Robbie the Robot. So it's interesting now. We live in this time where AI has become such a cultural thing, but this was over 60 years ago, and with Robbie the Robot, which I'll talk more about. So, just a little bit of the plot of Forbidden Planet. So, we're the 23rd century, around the year 2200, and we're on a space mission. By this point, humanity has achieved the ability to travel at light speed and things like that. I don't know if this was the first movie to use the term hyperdrive, but that term is used in this movie, as were many other terms that would be used in other science fiction movies. So, and I should mention as well that this film was loosely based on the William Shakespeare play The Tempest, which is that play. It's been a while since I read it, but it's about a shipwreck on an island, and it's about a drama that plays out among the people who are shipwrecked and the people who have settled on the island. So in this space mission, they want to investigate what happened on this planet, where a bunch of colonists had disappeared 20 years before, and they want to investigate and see what happened. Leslie Nielsen, a very young Leslie Nielsen, plays the captain of the ship, who leads his crewmen to the planet, and we also have them beaming down, and Forbidden Planet would be a big influence on Star Trek as well. So we have teleportation being used in the film, which is kind of funny because after they teleport, everyone acts like they're really tired and almost like it was a little bit painful going through teleportation. So we never really got that in Star Trek, but we get that with this film. So they land on the planet and they find Walter Pidgeon, who is a brilliant scientist who tells a story about why everyone died. Basically, I think it's described as some kind of force from space killed off everybody, and he was pretty much the lone survivor. And he also has a daughter played by Anne Francis, who is the only female member of the cast. And so, yeah, Walter Pidgeon is Dr. Edward Morbius, and so they're curious about what happened on the planet, and basically it's revealed that there was a very intelligent species who lived on this planet for a long time, who are far more advanced than humans ever were. They were known as the Krell, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Krell, but for some reason the Krell also have vanished from the planet, which is called Altair 4, right, is the name of the planet. A lot of things to, a lot of sci-fi names to remember with this film, which I've seen many times, and it is more of a dense film, certainly for the 1950s, and yeah, Altair 4. So So anyway, they start to investigate, and the Morbius has access to all this high technology. The crew is kind of shipwrecked on this island. They need to find a way to get off, and they feel like there's still more mysteries that Morbius isn't really telling them about what happened with his crew, and the mysteries of the 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 people that used to live there, the Krell. So, and that's the story. Basically, the story. There's also Anne Francis who plays Altera, the daughter, who. And one of the things that does date this movie is that the crew on Leslie Nielsen's ship, I mean, they're all white guys, we're told, who are sort of like high IQs, in supreme physical shape. So there is kind of like a weird eugenics thing in this movie that's kind of hinted at. But there's all these young men and this one woman. So there's like this, I don't know, strange sexual tension through the film that some scenes play upon, and the way Anne Francis plays the character, where she's very naive about the world, like the only human she's interacted with is her father, and there is this, and that kind of goes back to the Shakespeare play, but there is this romance that kind of plays out in the story as well, and what's going on there with the people on the planet. And then there's Robbie the robot, who was built to serve humans. If you are familiar with the 3 laws of robotics that Isaac Asimov made famous, Robbie the robot lives by those, where you can't harm a human, and you can't follow orders. You're supposed to follow orders of humans, but not if it violates any of the other rules, and things like that. And it's one of the great designs of a robot ever in movies, and very influential on movies to come, no doubt about it. So MGM also worked with Disney a little bit. There's some animation sequences in this film that were put in with live action in a very interesting way. So there's a lot of great animation. There's a lot great matte paintings throughout the film. I mean, just the set designs and the production designs are very impressive. Look very impressive throughout the film. The use of music as well was innovative, in that it's an all electronic score, which was done by the Barons, BB and Louis Baron, who worked months putting the score together, working with kind of a primitive synthesizer. Okay, and there is a making of feature on this Blu-ray. I think it was made in the 2000s, where they were able to talk to people who worked on the film, who were still alive at the time. But back to the plot, I mean, some intrigue begins to play out, and it's clear Morbius isn't telling them everything, and he shows them, and there's a long scene where Morbius tells the tale of the Krell and how advanced their technology was, and how they had this elaborate energy system and tunnel system, and all that's very visually impressive. Although it's been pointed out, we never actually do see the Krell. We can only imagine them, which I think was really interesting as well. But modern viewers might complain about that, because a lot of it is Morbius just talking about the Krell for a long scene. There's like a long scene where just the other characters are listening and he's talking. But like I said, the visuals around it are really interesting, and they work well. And then we reveal that basically we learn that they became so advanced that they were able to create things with their mind, that they were able to harness the power of the mind, and that led to their downfall in many ways. And there is this psychological component to the film too, Freudian psychology about the id, that the primitive side of our psychology, the primitive drives, and this is another factor to take in consideration when thinking about harnessing the power of the mind and things like that. So there's an interesting psychological Freudian psychology going on through the film, which is interesting, and that kind of goes with the Cold War. I mean, there is a heavy atomic power is mentioned a lot in the film, and of course the idea about can humanity survive this high technology when we still have these primitive parts of our brain. So that's a very cerebral idea to put into a science fiction movie in the mid 1950s. But in this future, we learn that basically nuclear power is used for spaceships and things like that. So we're living in this is the very positive side of nuclear power and what it can do, and possibly be the key to long-term space travel and things like that. But it can also be a very destructive force, very destructive power, and all that. So that's an interesting idea running through the film. It's also, we never quite learned about the crew. Like, there's this, as I mentioned, like the eugenics thing in the movie, but also like what is their mission militaristic? Is it strictly exploration? At one point, Leslie Nielsen's talking about as if they're in some kind of technological race to get to keep getting better and better technology. So there's this idea that even 200 years in the future, they're still searching for better technology, better things like that, which reflects the 1950s. So that's an interesting idea, and and to talk about the influence of this movie a little bit. I mean, I think it has a lot of tones to the movie where it's very serious, it's very playful, there are some interesting ideas through it, and all that. Clearly, if you've watched Star Trek, I mean, you cannot deny the influence that this movie had on the original Star Trek with Gene Roddenberry. I mean, the movie really almost has the same tone and feel of like a Star Trek episode later in the decade. So that's no doubt about it. That's there. And I know there's been many attempts to remake Forbidden Planet that, like a lot of Hollywood properties, these projects just kind of go on and on. They never quite get made. And it would be interesting to see a new take on Forbidden Planet. I think it's very ripe for a remake, where how this movie really gets into themes of nuclear power, of artificial intelligence, and humanity's place in space, and humanistic ideas about what makes us human. So there's really a lot of great questions raised in this film that I think would really make for an interesting remake. And so visually it's a great movie. The color scheme, the matte paintings I mentioned, the sound design, there's just a lot of elements in this movie that really make it watchable. Even if the story, like I said, for the 50s is a bit cerebral for the 50s, but I think there's so much going on, and in the documentary they talked about how actually there was a kid's version of the story that the studios put out, where they edited all kind of the romantic subplots out and some of the more cerebral ideas, I guess, and kind of made a more kid-friendly version. Of course, the kids loved Robbie the Robot. Everybody loved Robbie the Robot. So that was a big draw to get the kids into the movie. So I found that interesting too. And then there was a movie made a year or two later called The Invisible Boy with Robbie the Robot, which is not necessarily a science fiction film. The movie is on this Blu-ray disc. It's more of kind of a family kids movie, and I believe it's set in the present, in the 1950s. But But anyway, in the 50s and 60s, 70s, as I said, the robot would appear in a lot of TV shows and would be referenced a lot during that time. So, yeah, Forbidden Planet, it's definitely a innovative science fiction film for its time, and would kind of raise the bar for more movies to come along. So anyway, those are some thoughts on Forbidden Planet. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later.